The link between abortion and breast cancer rests on two principles. The first is how much estrogen do you get exposed to in your lifetime? And the second is how soon do you mature your lobules from type 1 and 2 to type 3 and 4? Type 1 and 2 lobules are the places that have the TDLUs, the terminal ductal lobular units, where we know breast cancers arise. So what happens is in the first part of pregnancy, within the first few days, your estrogen levels start to rise. And this stimulates those lobules to increase in size and number. The only way that a woman develops the type 3 and 4 lobules is after 32 weeks of pregnancy. After 32 weeks, they mature and become resistant to carcinogens, and they become type 3 and 4 lobules, which make the milk. If a woman interrupts that pregnancy before that full maturation occurs after 32 weeks, all she's done is increase the number of type 1 and 2 lobules that she's had. And we know that that's where breast cancers arise. 23% of all conceptions will end in a spontaneous abortion, otherwise known as a miscarriage. We know that those miscarriages are associated with pregnancies that have a low estrogen level. The breasts aren't stimulated. Those pregnancies don't increase the number of type 1 and 2 lobules because the estrogen levels are low. So no, spontaneous abortions in the first trimester will not increase a woman's risk of breast cancer.
In an epidemiological study, we study populations of people, in this case women, and we try to emulate what a controlled experiment will do. So we'll take a group typically of women who have the disease in question, breast cancer, and then we'll take a population of women that is as closely matched as we can get them, except that they don't have breast cancer. And then typically we'll look back and see what their medical history, their exposure to the risk factor in question, in this case abortion, would be. Just epidemiological studies don't necessarily prove causation. There are a lot of criteria, a number of criteria that epidemiologists use to infer a causal association, to infer that a particular exposure actually can cause a particular disease. The first criterion is that the cause must precede the effect. In other words, the risk factor has to precede the occurrence of the disease. Abortion has to precede breast cancer. And although that sounds silly, that anyone should even have to say that, there was actually one very high-profile study that has a lot of credibility attached to it, which actually violated that principle by using diagnoses of breast cancer going back to 1968, while not even including a single abortion until 1973. Number two, it needs to be observed in a number of different studies. In terms of abortion and breast cancer, it's been observed up until early this year in 28 out of 37 epidemiological studies, and in fact 13 out of 15 in the United States. So there is an overwhelming preponderance of the data that does show an association between induced abortion and breast cancer. A third criterion that should be satisfied is that the association should be statistically significant. What that means is that the study has enough data in order to establish that we are at least 95% certain that this association is not due to chance. Another criterion, a fourth criterion, which if it is satisfied gives us more confidence that we're really looking at a cause, is if the association is strong. Women, for example, who have abortions while they're teenagers, or who have abortions over the age of 30, or who have a family history of breast cancer. Studies have shown these to be at many times higher risk of getting breast cancer. A fifth criterion is one called the dose effect. Some exposure is really causing some disease. If you're exposed to more of it, you should have a greater chance of getting the disease. So there is some very good evidence that the longer the pregnancy goes on, the greater the risk. But even with all these 5 criteria being satisfied, none of them can be taken as a real causal association unless it makes biological sense. We do know that the main female sex hormone, estrogen, whose purpose is to make the breasts grow, is implicated in just about every other risk factor that we know of for breast cancer.
Estrogen is really carcinogen as well. The government has put it on its list of carcinogens along with creosote. And it turns out that estrogen is also a genotoxin, which means that estrogen actually damages the DNA. For example, one of the estrogen metabolites or byproducts, as our body breaks down the estrogen, actually will pull purine bases out of DNA chains, causing mutations. And if the mutation is bad enough, it can cause a breast cancer cell to form. So again, the earlier in life a woman matures her breast cells from type 1, which she's born with, to type 3 and 4, the lower her risk of breast cancer. So the earlier in life a woman has a full-term pregnancy, the lower her risk of breast cancer.